Gunnery Sergeant William, Bill, Masterson, U.S. Marine Corps, sits on a huge airplane and can't wait to get home. He picks her up and promises to buy her a new comb to go with her long red hair and mesmerizing green eyes. Her ambition was to work for her father's company, a well-known investment firm with offices all over the country. Meanwhile, her boyfriend is a Lance Corporal who took part in Boy Scout sniper training. The Masterson family has a long history of serving in Corps units and fighting in important conflicts throughout American history. A month before he left, they talked about wedding preparations. "I come from a typical family," he told her. He wanted to ask her father's permission to marry her. Her eyes twinkled and she grinned. That weekend they went to her parents' home in Los Angeles. Of course her parents suggested they share a room. John Whitman's father called him into the study and asked him to buy him a drink. Bill accepted and sat down. When Libby's father asked him to sit down, "Young man," he asked, "what are your plans?" "For my daughter, sir, I intend to marry her if you agree," Bill said, and John smiled and agreed. "You should know that I am grooming her to handle the family business," he said, and Bill understood, "and I am active in the family business," he explained. "Yes sir, I do." Bill confirmed that our organization has offices all over the country. "Libby and I discussed this and she is willing to move with me so we can be together. Yes, she can transfer with you for the first 10 or 15 years, but she must ultimately stay in Los Angeles. I want her to be a successful professional someday. Is that okay with you?" Bill nodded. "I'm a Marine, sir," he said. "I learned how to improvise, adapt, and conquer." John, he grinned and nodded. He pulled out a document and handed it to Bill. "Bill, Abby and my wife are just like you," he said. "Libby appreciates your company as well, and I give you my blessing to marry her. I'm just looking out for my daughter. A lot of people are attracted to her because she's rich." Bill felt insulted at first, but he understood the purpose of the agreement, and wanted to make sure that it was all fair. Bill said, "If you don't mind, I'd like to discuss it first with our Pendleton S. JAG attorney," to which John replied, "I understand your point of view. My father always advised me to consult an attorney before signing anything." The agreement was a standard instrument designed to protect Jennings' property in the event of a divorce. The contract also states that if cheating is the cause of the divorce, the party at fault, i.e., Bill, will not receive alimony from the other party and will lose 70% of the accumulated marital property, including the house, home, cars, and other property. Bill and Libby showed the updated documents to their father, John, who asked about the revisions, and Bill explained that the attorney thought it would help balance the property I had inherited from my parents. That night, at family dinner, Bill proposed to Libby in front of her parents, presenting her with a diamond ring, to which she agreed and hugged him warmly while her parents applauded. "She asked me if I had seen it on the Marine Corps logo, but I didn't know what it meant. It's the motto of the Marine Corps." Bill explained that it meant Semper Fi. He went on to explain how important integrity and loyalty were to him, and how important it was to know that he could trust and rely on those around him, even if they lacked those qualities. He grinned and kissed her softly. "I will always be faithful to you, my princess," he murmured. Bill had had a rough first stint on Okinawa, longing for Libby and spending his free time writing her letters and sending her pictures instead of joining the Marines and dating local girls. Bill, a newly promoted sergeant, wore a blue tuxedo, and some Marines he had met in Pendleton served as ushers, and after the ceremony, they walked under the Marine Corps Sword Arch before heading to Hawaii for their honeymoon. In 2000, Bill re-enlisted, and was later stationed in Washington, D.C., at the 9th Marine Corps Barracks and They Street, and in 2001 their daughter, Jenny, was born, nearly a year after their marriage, who inherited her mother's hair and eyes while resembling her father in many of her facial features. Shortly after, a fourth jet crashed in Pennsylvania and the passengers struggled with intruders. Bill was asked to use his sniping talents rather than paperwork. Libby admits that being at the center is part of their lives when Bill is overseas, that she works in her father's Los Angeles law office and takes care of their daughter, and that she works in the closest office when he returns, and that their love and familial bonds keep them fulfilled. While Libby admired Bill's service and often expressed her gratitude, Bill was proud of Libby's accomplishments and the positive adjustments she implemented at Whitman Holdings that made the company more family-friendly. Libby was proud of her husband's accomplishments in the Marine Corps and endeavored to share that enthusiasm with others, and as his service came to an end in 2012, he re-enlisted for another 6 years in the Corps unit. While on active duty, he encountered a dangerous situation where, after eliminating his target, he was surrounded by hostile soldiers and feared for the safety of his family as they did not follow POW laws, and instead of being executed, he was placed in a box and moved repeatedly during non-transportation. His Arabic was very poor, but he managed to learn a few words and phrases. He was spared because someone in the U.S. wanted to get him out of danger but didn't want to kill him. The soldiers didn't find any sign of him until he was miles away and still moving, and after a thorough search, they gave up on him. Whenever he saw a path he followed it, all the while staying hidden. Bill walked along looking for clues to his whereabouts. He would stop when he was eating and take a small snapshot out of his wallet, a picture of his wife and daughter. He kissed it, put it back in his wallet and kept going. Bill lost track of time and almost gave up, but the figures of Libby and Jenny kept him going, and when he felt fatigued, he thought of them and motivated himself to keep going. He hid in the rain and cleaned his body with it. The terrain changed from time to time, but Bill continued to walk eastward, all the time dodging the crowds. He didn't know how long he'd been wandering, but eventually it happened. He stumbled upon a large metropolis, a fairly large contemporary city. His camouflage clothes were torn and tattered, his boots were full of holes, his beard was long and unkempt, looking frail and malnourished, a far cry from his old self. Luckily he still had his ID and dog tags. He saw a sign that said he was in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. He knew there was an embassy in town, so he cautiously moved forward. He saw the building and the American flag. He approached the front door, but a Marine security guard stopped him. He showed his ID and introduced himself. The security guard took his ID and checked it and then called for someone to come inside. Bill soon found himself sitting in a wheelchair surrounded by Marines in blue pants. They took him in. A consular officer collected his fingerprint information, verified his identity and quickly transported him to the hospital. His uniform was cut off because of his condition. He was cleaned, dressed and laid down in a hospital bed. The medical staff quickly began to provide water and medication through and for in his arm. Others' blood was drawn and a doctor examined him carefully. "Mr. Masterson," the doctor replied. "You're just in time." The doctor left the room. Bill felt much better and eventually fell asleep. When he woke up, a man in a suit and clean-shaven was in the room going through papers in a folder. When he saw Bill moving them and focused his attention on him, Bill shook his head. "I don't know. It's 2016, October 15th, the man asked. "You've been missing for over 4 years." He explained. "Can you tell me where you are and who you know?" Bill said, "Somewhere west of here. I'm not sure who's holding me. I've been turned over to different organizations along the way. I've heard different names. I believe one of them is Bukaram, but I'm not sure." "How did you survive?" John asked. "Thanks to the School of the Prophets." Bill said. John smiled. "I will." He said, "Do you remember anything else?" Bill said, "Yes." Bill said, "I remember hearing some of the men who captured me talking about a benefactor. Listen, Gunner, I've got to go, but I just want you to know that your family already knows that you're alive and well and are making arrangements for you, and as soon as the doctors here think it's safe for you to travel, we're going to send you to Bethesda for rehabilitation." He contracted multiple illnesses during the trip and was very lethargic. Ebola was a concern, but tests came back negative. He slept most of the way to Bethesda, and when he arrived he was surprised to find his new room filled with cards, messages, and flowers. He had received cards from his parents, Libby's parents, and Jenny, but his wife had just sent a plain old get well card. He'd seen several doctors. Every part of his body had been examined, probed, blood drawn, various bodily fluids sampled, and he'd even undergone a psychological evaluation where the medical staff had recommended a specific diet and a strict physical regimen. He found out that her father had retired 3 years ago, and Libby had taken over as CEO, and her new role required her to spend time with Brad Jefferson, the chairman of the board of directors, and 2 months later he was cleared for release from the hospital, which had been 5 years since his arrest, and 6 years since he had last seen his wife and children, and Jenny received a phone call from Bill, telling her he was on his way home and would see her at the airport soon. Bill looked out the airplane window and wondered what awaited him. He had only received a get-well card from Libby and wondered if she had moved away. He noticed that his daughter looked a lot like Libby when they first met. Jenny's red hair was flying in the air as she rushed towards him, opening her arms and calling out for her daddy, hugging him hard and kissing his face. Her eyes filled with tears as he embraced her. "I missed you so much," she said, and as he stared at her, his voice was filled with emotion. He said, "I missed you too, princess," and said, "Is your mom here?" Jenny picks up his sea bag, but it's too heavy for her. A man in a black chauffeur suit comes over and grabs it from her. They carry his stuff into the trunk. Bill sits in the back seat with Jenny, and he asks Jenny what's going on, and Jenny picks up a small laptop and plugs in a drive. She explained, "You know she's the CEO, right?" Bill agreed. "So she's been with Brad Jefferson, the chairman of the board?" Bill asked. "Yes," Jenny replied. "About 3 years ago, they started having lunch together, and ended up having dinner together. It's a serious relationship now." "Has he been with your mom for 3 years?" Bill asked Jenny. Jenny nodded her head in agreement. Yes, I'm sorry, Dad. I tried to tell her it wasn't right, but she wouldn't agree. I tried to tell her it wasn't right, but she wouldn't listen, Dad. She looks completely different now. She used to be very kind, but now she's unapproachable. Jenny says she bosses people around and treats them badly. I assured her you'd be back, but she didn't seem to care. Then she started spending a lot of time with the man called Brad. She started bringing him home. I could hear them in her room having fun. I don't like it. She said she was getting married. Bill hugged her. I'm so sorry. Princess, I wish I could be here. He said, I understand, Dad. She claimed I did anything to get back at her. Bill said, someone at school suggested I record some footage for when you get home, so I bought some stuff online with Mom's permission and set up some cameras in her room, so she wouldn't be able to find them. I recorded some videos and I just watched them for a while. They were so embarrassing for me. Bill watched the first video of Libby and Brad undressing in her room. They soon found themselves in an intimate moment together. Bill was disturbed by what he saw. Brad appeared to be out of it as he embraced his wife, breathing heavily. Bill just watched for a minute or two and then turned off the video. Jenny responded by saying, Dad, there's a lot more of this going on. I apologize. It's not your fault, Princess. Bill responded. You might want to listen to the videos from the past couple weeks. She hands Bill the keys and Bill asks what they are. They are the keys to your truck, Dad, she explains. When I knew you were coming home, I took your truck out of storage and fixed it up. It's in the garage, 154, X4. He was very happy with the truck. I think you're going to need it. Mom had it relicensed and insured to make it legal. Thank you, but I need more than just a truck. I need a place to live. I can't live in a house with an unfaithful wife. Can I live with you? Bill smiled and said, sure, you can stay with me if you want, Bill replied. Jenny grinned and hugged him. Thanks, Dad, she replied, but you know, the judge might order you to stay with your mom, he said. That's usually what happens in a divorce, so are you going to divorce her? At that point, the car pulled into a gated driveway and stopped in front of a large house with huge columns. My God, Bill said, do you live here? Yes, said Jenny. Unfortunately, Brad suggested she buy it when she became CEO. I can't afford to look at this place. They went up a long curved staircase that reminded Bill of an episode of Gone with the Wind. Bill let the man struggle with his shipping bag and followed him to a door on the second floor. The lady said you have to stay here. The man said so as he opened the door. Bill took the bag from the man and threw it on the bed. He looked around and thought the sterile room looked a lot like something you would find in a fancy hotel. Bill said I won't be here long. He thanked the servant and walked out of the room and asked Jenny how to get to the master bedroom. Jenny led him down the hallway and opened the double doors and Bill saw some family photos and memorabilia. Fortunately, they hadn't been filed yet, and in the folder was a notarized copy of the prenuptial agreement he and Libby had signed years ago. He picked up a sea bag and a travel bag and glanced at Jenny. Where's my truck? He said I need to get out of this place. What's wrong, Dad? She asked. Did you know Mom was going to declare me dead? She asked. Yes, I will tell you where I am, he said, but I have to talk to your mom about this, and it won't be easy. I understand, Dad, she replied, but before you leave, I have a few things to say. She hands him the phone and says this is the youth phone I bought so we can stay in touch. She explains, it has all the latest technology in it. I've activated it for you. Thank you, Princess. He suggests it will come in handy. You're welcome, she says. She hands him the laptop. You'll still need this. I've already programmed my phone number for you. He thanks her for the laptop. She handed him an envelope. Bill asked what it was. It's an invitation to a big workplace social event. Mom's going out tonight. She said I can't stay in the same room with her and Bradshaw. I thought it would be fun if you could come to my apartment. I heard the press is going to be there as well. He opened the envelope and noted the time. It was the evening, 900 He smiled his thanks and said, now where's my truck? I've got a lot to do. Come with me, she said. Bill packed his bags and followed his daughter to the bottom of the stairs. The servant carrying the equipment stopped them. Sir, lunch will be served in 15 minutes, he said. Will you be with us? Yes, sir. I will tell her she can kiss your ass, the servant added. Bill was satisfied with his answer. Bill nodded. Did you see that? I apologize for everything, Dad. Please stay in touch, she added as he hugged her. I'll always be there for you. It's not your fault, he told her. I'll call you when I'm settled somewhere. Thanks for everything. I love you, Princess, and I love you too, Daddy. He made coffee in the free coffee maker and started looking in the phone book for a divorce attorney and scheduled an appointment for later in the day. He removed the USB drive that Jenny had provided and scanned the lengthy list of videos, and as painful as it was, he watched the movie bypassing most of the sexual content because he wasn't interested in it. In one of the recent videos, Libby and Brad got into an argument. Brad suggested an intimate encounter but Libby refused, saying that her husband was still alive and they were still married. She wouldn't do that. Libby was visibly upset. She retreated to the master bathroom and closed the door behind her with force. Brad pulled out his cell phone and made a call. Unbeknownst to Bill, he could only hear part of the conversation. "Don't give me that look when you're done. I'm not the one who lost him. You only had one mission, to keep Masterson off the market for 5 years, which you failed to do. Do that and you'll receive the remainder of the cash I owe you. And no, she doesn't know about this. You should stay away from her. Do you agree? I have to go. Simply finish it. Bye." He ended the call. Just as Libby came out of the restroom, Bill went through the video. He was shocked by what he heard. Bill copied the video to his laptop and prepared to meet with his lawyer. He changed his uniform to jeans and a Bethesda-supplied polo shirt, put everything away and went to the lawyer's office. Sally Clemens was a no-nonsense lawyer with a grudge against men, but Sally's surprised expression convinced him to stay. "Are you leaving Mr. Masterson?" she asked. "Look, Miss Clemens," Bill explained, "my wife was unfaithful to me during the 3 years I was away, and I went through a lot of trouble to get back to the States only to find out that she was still planning to declare me dead." Her face softened a little. "I'm sorry, Mr. Masterson," she said. "I don't represent people who cheat. In my experience, a lot of the people who come to me do so because they think I can help their marriages." "I think that's right, Miss Clemens. You're making an assumption without even listening to me," Bill said. "I think I'm going to have to look for someone else." He started to leave, but she stopped him. "Please let me look at your stuff." Bill sat down and pulled out his flash drive and handed her a folder with the prenuptial agreement and the papers announcing his death. Sally asked. She quickly realized this was a mistake. "How dare you say that?" Bill snarled. "I don't give a damn about her money. We never had a good marriage until that man came along. I have every reason to believe that they are the cause of my situation. I just want a divorce as soon as possible on the basis of a prenuptial agreement so I can start my life over again." "Mr. Masterson, I'm sorry. Sally said that you said you had a daughter. Do you want custody of her?" "Yes, she wants to stay with me," Bill said. "Sally said she was 16 so the judge might consider that, but in reality, getting custody is unlikely. The court usually awards custody to the mother." Sally nodded. "When can we start?" "I can have the paperwork done and delivered to her company in 2 or 3 days, she said. "We can file under a prenuptial agreement. You know California is a no-fault liability state, so you can't file for adultery. Do you want any support from your wife?" He realized he had a few hours before the evening's events and was getting a little hungry. He walked into the store and ordered a burger and a soft drink. After eating, he took a sip of his drink and pondered who to contact about Jefferson. As he picked up his drink, a voice rang out beside him. "Hello, Gunny," said an older man. His hair was mostly gray and slightly to the left of the center of his head. "How did you know I was a gunnery sergeant?" Bill asked. The man smiled crookedly. He replied, "You look like a gunnery sergeant to me." Bill laughed and responded, "Maybe we should change out of our uniforms," he suggested. The man laughed and Bill held out his hand. "Gunnery Sergeant Bill Masterson, USMC." The man shook his hand. "No," he said. "I was impressed with your performance on TV." "I was impressed with your performance on TV," he said. "Trekking across equatorial Africa without a map, dodging terrorists, and surviving on land for 5 years. Your SEAL instructors must have been excellent." They were all agreed to by Bill. "What brings you here?" "I won't be interviewed if that's what you're looking for." The man grinned and showed his credentials. Bill noticed the pistol hidden in his jacket. "Lee Gibson and CIS, can we talk privately?" he said. "My pickup is in the back." Bill followed me, keeping an eye on the two men. "They've been watching me since I got here," Lee explained. "They've been following you for a long time. If they show up behind us, follow me." "Well, you're the boss," Bill said. As they left the bar, the two men stood up and followed them out the door. Lee noticed and turned to Bill. "Can you deal with the curly?" He saw the shadow of a man in the back window, a man with curly hair and what appeared to be a bag hanging from his waist. He was ready to pounce. Bill sidestepped and surprised the man with a punch to the stomach. The man's legs went weak. Bill kneed him in the face, breaking his nose. The man dropped the knife and fell to the paved parking lot. Bill kicked him in the groin many times, and then kicked it away. He noticed that Gibson was talking on his cell phone while the other handcuffed man was handcuffed. After a while, another black SUV came and two men got out. One handcuffed the curly-haired man while the other mumbled something to Gibson. Bill laughed and said, "I'll show you what I'm made of." Lee got into his SUV and followed Bill into the motel. Lee asked, "I know who he is," Bill explained, "but I don't know him personally. I know he's the chairman of Whitman Enterprises, and I think he's responsible for my enslavement in Africa, but that's about it." "You're probably right," Bill said. "I've got a couple of videos you might be interested in." Lee asked what it was. Bill explained. "It's part of a chat he was having with a guy named Mahmoud. I didn't hear the rest of the content. He opened his laptop and played a video of Brad talking to Mahmoud. Lee's eyes widened as he listened. Do you have any other videos? Bill added, the video was taken in my wife's bedroom, and Lee inquired, so are you going to divorce her? Bill said, I just met with my attorney and she is currently preparing the papers. Maybe you should make her understand how important her behavior is. I don't think she really understands that, Lee said with a smile. I'll take care of it. I like that, she said. You're not a bad high school faculty member. Emily laughed as she poured the rest of the lemonade into the sink and then threw the glass away. Emily said, you probably won't be able to say that unless you start buying some real lemonade. Jack smiled and said, do you think I'm safe here? Just to be safe, she took out her cell phone and handed it to Jack. Call me anytime you need me. Thanks, Jack said, writing his phone number on a small slip of paper and handing it to Emily, who slipped it into her pocket. He couldn't help but notice Brad's satisfied expression as he talked, but Libby didn't seem to care. He parked his car in the hotel that had been locked for the event and made a point of walking up to the entrance, removing his cover and showing his invitation to the doorman, Bill, who went inside and found Libby and Brad, her hair darker and shorter, her eyes and mouth with new lines around them, and as Bill approached, Libby greeted him by sarcastically asking, is it William now? She turned to Brad and Bill approached him, noting that he was at least 3 inches taller than Libby's lover as he approached a new recruit who was about to suit up and toe the line. Bill held out his hand. Brad took Bill's hand. Bill squeezed it hard enough to make Brad wince in pain. So you're Brad Jefferson, Bill said. You're the one who's been with my wife for the last 3 years. Bill's eyes were filled with anger. Libby had never seen this side of him before, and no matter what he said, his voice sounded full of resentment. Bill steered her aside and put his hand on her elbow. Bill, are you making a scene? That's why you decided to stay with that guy and announce that I was dead? Yes, I'm well aware of that. I'm sorry, but the news of my death was exaggerated. Libby's face reddened and she looked down at the floor. Do you remember what I told you about Semper Fidelis and the definition of loyalty? He asked her and she nodded. So guess what? When you chose to stay with him, when you chose to be with him, you became my traitor. You became my adversary. Her eyes widened in shock. Do you know how I treat my enemies? Bill, please think twice before you do anything. Brad is a very powerful man and he has caused you difficulties, she explained. Bill laughed in her face. He replied, you have no idea what you are talking about. Who do you think imprisoned me all those years ago? Her eyes widened even more. He wasn't sure that Brad was responsible for imprisoning him, but he was curious about her reaction. You seem to have forgotten that I am a U.S. Marine. I don't run from challenges. You are no longer a part of my life and I am no longer your enemy. He pulled out the photo he had taken with him through Africa and gave it to her. A photo that has helped me travel all over Africa, he explained. When I get cold, tired, hungry, and sick, the thought of my loving wife and daughter waiting for me at home gives me the courage to keep going. I really don't care anymore, he said. Do what you want with it. When you get the paperwork, sign it and be done with it. She bawled her eyes out. He turned to leave. He could hear her crying to him, but he held on. A tear ran down his cheek. He was enraged, and went to a local tavern to escape from the problem. He ordered a drink, and after he finished it, he ordered another one. I have been through hard times too. My first marriage ended in disaster and I have been divorced twice since. It has been difficult, but things are going to get better. Yes, I need some good news, Bill said, taking a sip of his drink. The 2 men who contacted you today have revealed everything, Lee said. They revealed that Brad instructed them to target you and pay for your capture. They claim that no one else in the U.S. is involved. We are pursuing other leads and intend to interrogate Brad and your wife tomorrow. Are these 2 still in custody? Bill inquired. Absolutely in custody, Lee replied. We will have a couple of agents watching you just in case. You can see how they got you. Lee explained that we don't believe she played any part in his plan. My gut tells me no, but I haven't spoken to her yet, he replied. I'll know when I speak to her. Allow my companion to drive you back to your lodgings, Lee said. Bill considered confronting Lee, but he gave the keys to Lee's companion. When he got back to the hotel, the phone rang. Dad, are you okay? Jenny asked. Yes, Princess. Why did Bill ask? Mom was very upset when she arrived home last night. Jenny said I've never seen her cry like that before. Is Brad with her? She said I don't like what she's doing either, but I don't want her to get hurt. Don't worry, Princess. Bill ended the call. Lee arrived early that afternoon and picked up Bill, drove him to NCIS headquarters where Libby and her lover would be investigated. Bill watched from an observation room. Libby was let in and sat down and given a bottle of water. She didn't seem happy to wait, but there was nothing she could do about that. Lee finally enters the room and sits across from her. Libby asks provocatively, why am I here? 2 of the photos were of the men who had attacked Lee and Bill, while the third was of Bill as he arrived at the embassy in Addis Ababa. What happened? Libby was shocked when he saw the photos. Based on his description, we estimated that he had traveled about 2,500 miles, and we believed he had escaped his kidnappers somewhere in Ghana. Lee said, if we give him another day or two, he likely won't be able to escape. Libby began to cry. I need to decide if I want to charge you with being an accomplice to kidnapping or attempted murder, Lee explained, or both, plus the charge of aiding a known terrorist. Libby was stunned. I didn't do any of those things, Lee said. Your partner did. He paid these two men to attack and murder your husband, and they failed of course, and they admitted Brad's involvement, and you intended to marry Brad after your spouse was declared dead, Lee inquired. Yes. What happened when he and his wife divorced? Libby said, her eyes welling up with tears, and Lee stared at Libby, and he explained that you and Brad Jefferson began a relationship, Brad Jefferson's relationship, and it is believed that you intended to marry your husband after he was court declared dead and the divorce was finalized, but we want you to believe that you didn't know that Brad had paid for your husband to be kidnapped and held in custody for 5 years, that perhaps he ordered the attack on your husband. Is that correct? Libby started to cry. You have to believe me, she mumbled, tears streaming down her cheeks. I didn't know that Bill had been kidnapped or that someone had attacked him. Brad has implicated you, said it was entirely your idea. Libby's eyes glittered with anger. It's not true, you already know that. I love my husband, she said. I would never do that to him, but did you have an affair? But Brad claimed that Bill might be dead. She claimed that she wouldn't have cheated on him if she knew he was alive. I waited about 2 years and I didn't hear anything from you. I don't know what to think. Libby held her head and cried, and a minute later, Brad walked into the room. He approached Libby and put his hands on her, and she jumped up from her chair and hit him with a clenched fist, knocking him to the floor. Lee opens the door and pulls Brad up off the floor with his hands behind his back. Bill turns and walks away, leaving Libby crying behind him. The next afternoon, Sally received the divorce papers at her office and she called Bill. She told me to tell you that you can see Jenny anytime you want, that she resigned as CEO of Whitman Enterprises, effective immediately, and put her house up for sale. Sally said if you guys make up you can still call this off. She said you haven't heard her side of the story yet, maybe you guys should be closer. I'll think about it, he replied. Thank you for your help. He ended the call and went to a nearby cafe for a cup of coffee. Sipping his second cup of coffee, Lee came in. Bill invited him for a cup of coffee, and they talked about their day-to-day lives. I'm sure Libby is just as much of a victim. I'll leave it at that when I finish my investigation. Sergeant Bill glanced at the chevron and nodded. I'll be there early tomorrow. He walked over to Sally's office and picked up the envelope Libby had left earlier. Inside was a cashier's check with lots of zeros and a business card. Sally replied, if you really care about her, you have 6 months, things can be turned around. Maybe you should contact her. She suggested you at least think about it. I'll think about it, he agreed, and upon returning to the motel he contacted Jenny. Hi Dad, she said. How are you feeling? He said not too good. He'd like to get a burger somewhere. Absolutely, she replied. When would you like to meet up? How about now? He inquired. I'll be waiting for you, she said, and Bill got into his pickup truck and picked up Jenny. Luckily, Libby wasn't home. They drove to the nearest inn. I'm going to Camp Pendleton soon, Bill said. I'll get my orders tomorrow and then probably go there. I don't see the need to stay here any longer. I am going to be a scout sniper, asked Jenny, replied the new Nick at school, and she asked how long I was going to stay, and I don't know, replied he, about 3 years or so. I'd rather have you with us full time, she said with a smile, she explained, and he nodded. I'm a princess too, he said. I agree. When are you leaving? She asked. In a few days, and he said after I get my new chevron uniform. I'm going to be promoted to sergeant major. Congratulations, she said. Thank you, and he replied with a smile. Camp Pendleton isn't that far away, and we can see each other anytime we need to, and I like that. Dad, she replied, and you know Mom still loves you, so I want to be with you. He said. Do you still love her? She asked. Yes, I probably always will. He admitted that I am so disgusted with what she has done that I am not sure I can ever trust her again. I remember you once told me that people deserve a second chance after they make a mistake, she said. Don't you believe that Mommy deserves a second chance too? The next day he visited Lee, who took his orders and promotion certificate and congratulated him. Lee said, look at the certificate. I will contact you again. The investigation is almost over. I will let you know what I find out. Thank you. He took his uniform to the laundromat and sewed on a new chevron. He talked to the financial planner. Libby advised him and asked him what he wanted to do with the money she had given him. The financial planner looked surprised but said he would do what Bill asked, but Libby's absence affected him greatly. He felt as if an important part of his life was missing. He would normally have shared it all with her, but she was no longer around to give him motivation for 2 months. Bill called Jenny. Almost every other day, he learned that Libby had received an offer on her house and was considering buying a condo in San Diego. Brad was facing federal charges of colluding with terrorists in a conspiracy to commit murder, kidnapping, and supporting an enemy of the United States, which could result in a life sentence. And a month later, Jenny called Bill in a panic and told him that her mother was in the hospital, and he asked her what was wrong. She had tried to kill herself, and Jenny said, "Please come and see her, will you?" And Bill said, "I'm coming. Where is she?" "I came home from school and found her in bed." She explained. "There was a bottle of sleeping pills and a bottle of scotch. She held your avatar and didn't answer me. I called 911. They came and brought her here. I should have seen it coming. Dad, I'm sorry. It's okay." Bill said, "It's not your fault. They're going to take good care of her." His daughter exhaled. "Dad, all she does since you left is drink and cry. She doesn't cook, she doesn't clean, she doesn't do laundry, she barely eats anything. It's like she's lost the will to live. Can you forgive her, Father? She's miserable without you." "So am I." Bill hugged his daughter for a few minutes, then went to the nurse's station to find out what was going on. They asked Bill, "Are you a nurse?" The nurse hesitated, but gave Libby's information. She was in a room. "Doctor, I'll be right with you." Dr. Smith came over. "I'm Dr. Smith. Are you Elizabeth Masterson's husband?" Bill nodded. "Yes, I am." He closed his eyes and shed a tear, praying for her recovery. Jenny hugged him and both of them cried. He whispered, "Why are we living? Why are you doing this? Please don't die. I don't want to lose you like this." "Yes, Lips, it's me," he explained. "I'm really here." They sobbed as they hugged. Libby left the room. "I apologized to Bill," she said. "I never had a chance to explain. Will you forgive me?" He kissed her, gently placing his finger on her lips. "We'll talk later," he whispered. "Just focus on getting better." "Okay," she nodded. "Please stay with me." "I will," he reassured her while holding her delicate body close. "I won't leave, I promise." "You might want to take a break and have a shower," Jenny offered. "How is she?" "Sounds good," he replied. "She's getting better. I think she'll be fine, but, yes, a shower would be nice. She won't really get better until you two are back together." "Jenny, you know, she's been struggling," Bill said. "Yes, I know." He sat down next to Libby and held her hand. "I'll be back in a few moments." "Okay," she said as she held his hand tightly. "I promise I'll be back." He went to his room, took a shower, changed his clothes, called his supervisor and gave him an update. His supervisor said, "Take care of your wife. You have vacation time, so don't come back until she gets home." Bill agreed and went back to the hospital. Libby's eyes lit up. "You're back," she said. "I told you I'd be back," he said. And they spent the next day talking about what had happened to him while in captivity. "What happened during that time?" "The NCIS guy told me you traveled about 2,500 miles. In Africa," she said. "That must have been tough." "Yeah," he said. "I still have nightmares about it to this day." She frowned. "I'm so sorry, Bill," she said. "I didn't know Brad had you like that. Why did he do that? Why did you declare me dead? I missed you, but it felt good to have someone looking out for me. For 2 years I didn't hear anything from the military, and then one night he convinced me to drink, and that's what happened the first time. He told me that his wife would take everything in the divorce and that he would need the money to make ends meet until we were married." Libby explained. "That you were going to give him that money?" Bill asked me. "I wasn't thinking straight at the time." Libby admitted that I already had enough of my own money. "I thought your insurance was tainted money. I shouldn't have taken it. I ended the relationship as soon as I learned you were still alive. I told him I wouldn't be with him since we were still married. He didn't like it. I believed you were dead. No one ever told me you had been dead for a long time. Everyone said the chances of you being alive were very low." Bill listened carefully. "I understood what he was saying," he said, "but why were you so cold to me when I came back?" "I knew it was true when I saw you that night," she sobbed, then continued. "The look on your face the first time you confronted me. I'd never seen you like that before. The way you spoke to me," she said. "I knew then that I'd screwed up, and I never wanted to see that look again, and you wouldn't let me explain anything, and that you'd already made up your mind, and that's why you didn't ask for a divorce." Bill said. Libby nodded. "I knew it was a lost cause because you had the prenup, you had all the evidence," she said, "and even though I was lied to by that guy, I was wrong, so I backed down. What do you call it? A tactical retreat. You and I both lost. We both lost our lives." Bill said. "But your career in the Marines is still alive." She said yes, "but without you by my side, it was all meaningless," he said. Libby began to cry, her body shaking with sobs. He held her tight. "I'm so sorry," she cried. "I miss you so much. Please, Bill, tell me you forgive me." Tears slipped down his face as he thought of everything. She said, "I forgive you, Libby." He said, "I forgive you, I forgive you." The doctor eventually came into the room and told Libby that her tests were good and that she could be discharged. Bill called Jenny to let her know that she didn't need to come to the hospital. "Thank you, Dad," she replied. I'll have dinner ready by the time you get home. Bill helped Libby into the elevator and walked her to the front door. He was surprised when he walked into the apartment. It looked similar to when they were together. It was filled with pictures of his family and pictures from his military service. They walked into the dining room to find the table already set with portions for two. The table was lit with candles, chilled wine and covered plates. Jenny sat them down and unveiled the entree to reveal a large lasagna. She picked up her glass and toasted to us. Bill smiled and toasted with her. They ate the lasagna Jenny had prepared for them and then wiped the table clean. Libby turned to Bill. Would you like to stay for dessert? She asked with a grin. Dessert sounds great. He said, what do you have in mind? She took his hand and led him down the hall to the living room. She said this while she hugged him warmly. Bill felt a familiar sense of comfort. She said as she took his left hand and slipped his wedding ring on his ring finger. She then embraced him again until death do us part, she said. He smiled as he watched her change into her nightgown. You're too dressed for what I have in mind, she whispered. Once she was undressed, she knelt in front of him and wrapped her arms around his legs. Bill's excitement grew with each passing day as they shared passionate moments. Libby gently took him in her mouth, creating tender sensations as they exchanged loving glances and enjoyed each other's company. As their connection deepened, Bill felt an urge to express his love and said, I'm so grateful for this moment with you. Libby smiled and continued to embrace him as they shared a moment of connection that left them feeling enriched and fulfilled. He glanced at the clock and considered getting up, but Libby told him to stay for now. You're on vacation, and she said that you could always call them and tell them that you've been captured by a wild woman who won't leave you alone unless you give her 1,000,000 hugs. Bill laughed and Libby put her arms around him. I'm serious, she said. We have 6 years to make up for. So are we going to make up? He asked. She hesitated and then nodded. Yes, if you want to, she said. Bill laughed and nodded. I do, he said. The first thing I'm going to do is to call Sally and ask her to file the paperwork. I've got an idea, but what is it? She asked. What do you say we redo our wedding vows? He asks. You mean remarry? A month later, Bill and Libby renewed their wedding vows. Bill's parents flew in from Texas, and Libby's parents came in from Los Angeles, and as part of the ceremony, Bill pulled out the divorce papers that he had gotten from Sally, and gleefully tore them up as well, and then picked up the rest of the papers, and tore them up again, and threw the shredded paper into the air, causing everyone in the church to applaud. She asks Bill, where do you want to go on our second honeymoon? Bill pulls out a couple of tickets. I thought we could go somewhere in Europe for a bit of fun, he says. Libby looks surprised. Those are first-class tickets, she says. How did you do that? Bill smiles and pulls out an envelope and hands it to her. She looks at it confused. The William and Elizabeth Masterson Settlement Fund. She smiles and hugs him tightly. I'm so glad you put it to good use, she said. They returned from their trip, tired but happy, more in love than ever. A few days later, Bill came home from work and she sat in his recliner and asked him what was wrong. 9 months later, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy named Jonathan Travis Masterson. Her father Jenny was happy because she was finally a big sister. I wonder if HEK will enter the family business, Bill asked me. I sure hope not. Libby smiled. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story. If you enjoyed this post, please like it. If you haven't subscribed, please do. And if you have a story about your or anyone else's dilemma, please feel free to contact me.